Hello Internet, welcome to Politically Non-Binary. I'm Jackie Fox, your host. Welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about the debates and a little bit about the candidates as well. There are a few points that I'd like to make about them. I'm sure you know plenty about these two people. One of them was previously the president. One of them is currently the vice president. So these are relatively known quantities, even though Donald Trump is chaotic at best, and Kamala Harris is a little bit mysterious still, even at this point. First, though, before we get into any of that, I want to talk about the debates. So from an intellectual standpoint, trying to figure out who made the most sense, whose plans logically work out the best, I got to give it to the people who actually have plans.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
Now, to be fair, the Republican Party does have their own plan. Like, they're not without any sort of plans. It just seems like that when they're in these debates, they reference a few selected things. They're really cherry picking things to be proud of here. And I mean, the plan that they do have is Project 2025. And this is one of my first points regarding the two parties. There are a lot of ideas on the Democratic side. There's a lot of ideas that you and I would support, likely. There's a lot of ideas on the Republican side, too. But it's interesting to see that in terms of politicians, Republican politicians tend to be a lot like shapeshifters. It's really quite weird. They don't necessarily have a philosophy that they are proud of at this point. Arguing for the merits of conservatism is largely a losing battle at this point in history. And they don't even try. I've noted this previously in how our conservative party isn't actually all that conservative. They've adopted neoliberalism. They're not really an alternative if you're looking for a way out of neoliberalism. In fact, the people who seem to be designing the way out of neoliberalism, incrementally speaking, seems to be the Democratic Party. The Republican Party just wants to get us further deeply ingrained in monopoly and late-stage capitalism and all of these things. They're not addressing any of them. And this is because other people are writing their talking points. I mean, the Republican Party is a set of politicians for hire. Essentially, they're political mercenaries, in a way. Whoever is willing to pay them enough to get them to do what they want them to do, they will do it, essentially. There's a lot of corruption. I'm not saying that there isn't, like, certain types of corruption. Lobbyists, the kind of things I'm talking about here also apply to the Democratic side, but, like, you can tell the Republicans have literally no better ideas than whatever people are funding them to say. This became especially apparent in my last video. If you saw that one, that was on Russian and Iranian influence in our elections, with the Russians largely targeting the Harris-Walz campaign, whereas Iran is largely targeting the Trump campaign. And then you've got China, who's just kind of doing a little bit of everything. They came up in that video, but it wasn't like, there wasn't a cohesive thing. They're just trying to sow division in general. They're helping really both the Iranian and Russian talking points. And then going back into some of those projects, like the good old USA project or any of the other schemes that Doppelganger was running specifically. Since we've already kind of mentioned tenant media here, we have a bunch of influencers who are willing to say whatever people are willing to pay them. And I didn't get into this as hard in that video. The current affairs article that I read for that actually goes really deeply into probably one of the better excuses, in a way, that I've seen for these essentially paid Russian actors, is that them being paid by Russia to support a particular political message isn't fundamentally different than what they're already doing. They're just doing it for Russians now instead of American billionaires, typically. Although, especially during the Trump presidency, we saw a number of people who were getting in trouble for being influence actors for places like Turkey that just weren't registering as foreign agents. So, you know, there's a lot of this going around, and a lot of governments around the world are paying our politicians, specifically our Republican politicians, more often than not, it seems, to toe certain party lines. And at least with the Republican Party, we're seeing that the think tanks are actually writing those party lines, right? And this is part of the reason why they don't really talk about their plans within the debate structures. They're afraid of them. They're afraid of letting you know what they're going to do. If you think Kamala Harris is mysterious, it's only because we don't have a Project 2025 for her to show us exactly what she's going to do. For them, we have it. They don't want to talk about it, but it's there. You could read it, and in fact, my next video is probably going to be imagining a Project 2029, to where, I don't know, Republicans can actually do things that they talk about doing, that they pay lip service to, that Americans would actually like them to do. There are things that their philosophy can accomplish that more liberal philosophies cannot, and they would make a great competition to the Democratic Party. In addition, I think they should be doing some of the same things that the Democratic Party are doing. And largely, I think the Republican Party is in a weird state of semi-transition at this moment, in that there are a lot of people who are vying for what comes next. Because especially recently, it's become more and more obvious that Trump just isn't doing well in this competition. So there's a lot of people who are trying to be the next new face, and there are a lot of new ideas that are getting trotted out, like support for unions and stuff like that. Again, stuff that they're paying lip service to, not stuff that they're really doing, and stuff that I will have them do more of in this Project 2029. And hopefully somebody adopts that. I think it's a pretty good set of policy, even though it is conservative on a number of levels. But there are some things that they do, both sides do have established plans for, and I have critiques of both. I don't think either plan is perfect. I think that on terms of the economy, Kamala Harris addresses the issues, and Walz as well, addresses the issues much better than the Harris-Vance campaign. The Trump-Vance campaign. Harris-Vance, oh my God, that would be a match made in hell. Because while they don't like to characterize it as such, their tariff policy on foreign countries would essentially be a sales tax for American citizens. We would be paying a large amount of money in addition to what we're already paying for a number of just common household items.
My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
You know, there are so many things that we import from other places in this country. I mean, I was a kid when we really started having this cultural reckoning with how many things we have that are made in Pakistan or China or India or wherever. You know, we talked a lot about sweatshops when I was a kid, but it seems that those ideas have just penetrated and become normalized, and that is the status quo now. And as that is the status quo, this is effectively a sales tax. I mean, it's going to increase so many things that you buy on a daily basis by at least 20%. Like, that's ridiculous. And this is how he plans to pay. And like there are so many things that he hand waves away, and the Vance hand waves away, because they're going to make so much money. Don't even worry about it. The tariffs are going to make us so much money. Well, who's paying the tariffs? Donnie?
The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in.
Who do you have the authority to tax? Because it's not other governments, it's not other companies outside of the U.S. It is the people in the U.S. who buy from them. Us, the consumers, we pay the tax, Donnie. It's a sales tax. It is functionally a sales tax. It's not going to show up on your receipt as such because everything is just going to be more expensive, but you're going to be paying more for your goods. On the other hand, I don't think Kamala Harris quite has the whole picture, or at least she's not putting it out there. Maybe her plans are a little bit better than this, but it seems like she wants to do the bulk of things through something more in line with price controls. I don't mind price controls. I think price controls are a great idea. But specifically when we're talking about food inflation, it seems like a lot of the problem, a lot of the things that's driving food prices up is the supply chain itself. And it's the fact that the entire supply chain, from the farm to the processing, to the people who sell it to you, to the people who sell it to Walmart or whatever, to your grocery store to buy, they control every link in this chain. And they're paying themselves more at every step because they can, because there isn't competition, because free market fundamentals, any of these things that Republicans talk about caring about, none of those apply when you have a monopolistic control of an entire supply chain. And because of that control of the entire supply chain, they jack up the prices. See, as an author, by the way, this is a plug for my books. Check out my books. There's a link in the description where you can check out my books on Amazon. I hate working with Amazon, but what can I do? And the reason I hate working with Amazon is because they control the publisher. They control the printmaker. They control every step of the process. They control how much I pay for each book that I print. They control how much of the profit after that point I get to take home. They just control every step of the process, and it's very monopolistic, and it means that I don't make nearly as much money off of my books as I could or should if I was with a more reputable publisher, or at least one that didn't control the entirety of the book publishing supply chain. Not all of you are writers, though, so maybe you don't care about that. But the same thing is happening with your bacon, with your eggs, with your chicken, everything that you buy, all of your produce is all going through the same process. And it's becoming more expensive to you because of this. And we've seen more and more consolidation happen over the last 10 years. Specifically, under the Trump administration, a lot of these things accelerated. He laid the groundwork, especially with the way that he dealt with some of these things during COVID, for this to accelerate. It wasn't just the COVID supply chains. They were a big deal for a little while, but those supply chains have roughly been fixed. The supply chain issues that we face now are monopolistic supply chain issues. And this is something that I would really like to see the Harris-Walz campaign address, because the end results of price controls could be them forcing themselves to step back on how they control profits at every step of the way, so that they can meet the price guidelines. This could solve that problem, but it's an indirect way of doing so, and it doesn't seem to address the core fundamental problem. And by leaving that in play, I don't think that that's a great solution. It is a solution. It is not adding an additional sales tax to people who are already concerned about how they're going to pay for the food in their fridge. It will help. It's just not necessarily the ideal scenario that I would have in mind for such a thing. But I would say that that's a really favorable comparison for the Harris-Walz people. Also, just like anyone who's looked at Project 2025, like, you see what they're going to do, what they plan to do. If you are in the LGBT community, because they get called out and demonized throughout that document. If you are part of an immigrant community, they get called out and referenced throughout that document. They've got a lot of things to say about how they're going to run your life. And if that applies to you, that should be important to you. That should be a big motivator to keep them out of office. I mean, I feel like I'm saying things that are kind of obvious at this point, but that all of you already know, but here we are. But that brings me to, now that we've talked about the issues and looked at it from that perspective, who won the debates from a more aesthetic debate perspective? I think it's pretty easy to say that Kamala Harris won the first debate, right? She beat Trump so badly, both in terms of what she actually said, her proposals, what made sense, good ideas. She had all of those things in abundance. But what she really had, like, what made this debate stand out and why I think she won it so definitively is there's a metric that I'm going to apply to both of these debates. It seems really silly, right? And it's the idea of, like, what would it be like if you saw this on mute on a television? Who would you think was winning, right? Because if you're watching the Harris-Trump debate, it's really easy to see how, like, smug Kamala Harris is anytime he's talking. Like, she is just amused by his bullshit. She loves the idea that this is her opponent. She is having a fucking blast during this debate. I'm not going to say that Vance did a similar thing, but he was more composed. You could tell that Walz took his debate very seriously. He was having an intellectual contest. He was having a true argument with this J.D. Vance. But it looked like he was really trying hard, and it looked like that Vance was getting under his skin, where Vance seemed very aloof and charismatic, unfazed, unbothered. He wasn't, like, as clearly winning it. It wasn't his facial expression, necessarily, that was winning it. It was watching Walz increasingly frustrated by this man, like, gish galloping and just doing all these weird debate tactics that, like, debate bros know all about. If you were ever a part of the debate bros circuit or watched that stuff on YouTube, that's kind of where I started watching some of this political content on YouTube, then you'll know the tactics and you'll know why those aren't necessarily like a fair contest of who has the best ideas. It's who debates the best, who looks the best on stage, that kind of thing. Vance won some points for that. I think he also, like, generally came across as this really polite suburban white guy, right? He seemed like this kind of polite Midwestern. Like, he made Walz look a little angry in comparison, which isn't good. Just, again, for optics. Walz had plenty of reasons to be angry if you listen to the things that the Vance was saying. I was upset with a number of the things that he was saying. But in the same way, like, it's almost like he studied the previous debate and tried to Kamala it. Like, he tried to be this calm, cool, aloof, I'm always winning. If you're looking at me and you're looking at him, you can tell I'm always winning kind of thing. But personally, like, I like Walz typically better than I even like Harris. Walz is my favorite. I really wish he was the one running for president in some ways. There are a lot of experience issues that would come up if he wasn't the vice on this ticket that I think Kamala Harris answers a lot more nicely and neatly. But I really like this guy. Like, this is just wholesome dad. I think this is what America needs, and he has a lot of the right ideas. But one issue that I would be amiss talking about or not talking about in the context of this is Israel and their stances on Israel. And this came up in this debate as well. I think we've reached a point of no return with the war that is occurring in the Middle East at this point. Iran really getting into this with missiles or rockets at this point. This isn't just a two-sided conflict anymore. It's a multi-sided conflict. It's becoming like a fucking World War prism over there, and it is getting incredibly complicated. And I wish that we were more supportive of de-escalation. I wish that a peace agreement was in the future, a two-state solution, all these things that these people talk about. I don't feel the political motivation to go after these things in the way that these people answer questions. I don't feel much political will to defend the people of Gaza either. I don't feel much will to prosecute the war crimes that we've already determined that Israel is regularly doing. All I see is a somewhat more tepid, cautious support and better media optics and how they talk about it. I don't think that there's going to be a significant change in Israel policy between these two administrations, between Biden and Harris specifically. That being said, would Trump be better? No. Trump already got us this close to war in Iran. I don't know how many people remember this, especially since J.D. Vance said he was the only president that has not gotten us into another military conflict. Do you remember when he almost started a war with Iran? This was a thing that we were this close. Brand new war in the Middle East. So now that he is more actively, because these guys are super pro-Israel. It was it was an Israel dick-sucking competition for at least a little bit of this debate, and it was kind of unfortunate. But either one of these guys are going to have full support. But Trump is like already reckless enough on Iran that I honestly think he'd start a war with them. Like, so much escalation. And I don't really see a clear and easy way out of this. Like, it was already a complicated and hard situation because there's decades of animosity behind it. But now Iran is in it in a very particular and offensive and militaristic way. It's no longer online influence campaigns. It's no longer covert operations. It's no longer secret attacks. It's now rockets. So that's a big difference. And that also entails that, like, sticking up for and helping Israel to defend itself is going to become more and more of an obligation on our part. And in a way, I can see us getting more deeply ingrained into this than we already are with Ukraine, which is a little unfortunate as it is. Like, it's a shame that we don't have peace in that conflict. It's a shame that we could not resolve that conflict. Get Crimea back to Ukraine, big thing that I'm in support of. It's a shame that we couldn't do all of that before this new war started, because now both of them look like absolute quagmire. First, there's always been a lot of support for Russia from Donald Trump. I mean, he supports anyone who supports him, and Vladimir Putin has been a big Donald Trump supporter. I mean, it's obvious. Like, again, watch my videos on intelligence agencies and which intelligence agencies are supporting the Republican Party and how overtly they're doing it right now. And you'll see if he were to win, he would owe some portion of that win, especially if it's a close one, to the Russian influence campaign that has been running. I mean, if it weren't for things like the good old USA project, would there even be a Republican position? Because it's indistinguishable. You read through the planning document for this Russian propaganda and you read essentially a carbon copy of Trump's proposals. It's utterly wild. So that conflict is definitely going to go differently under a Trump administration. The only thing he's really said that he would do there, I mean, he's definitely going to pull out the support for Ukraine. That's potentially going to lead to a destabilization or a collapse, because it seems like everything there has really been balanced on a razor's edge. And I don't think that it's just for American support that they are successful. I think that they're a very hardy people. I think that they're tough. Looking at, I've covered Euromaidan in a couple of videos, and just looking at that whole experience, saying the people who got through this like a decade ago are going to be a hell of a force to invade, right? So I think they could hold out, but like, even without us putting support behind Russia, just withdrawing it from Ukraine would be a problem for them, a problem for that war. But there's also the potential that, like, Trump throws in more support with Russia, or this is what he said he was going to do. I don't think he'd do it, but this is what he said he's going to do, so I should at least take him at face value. He's going to try to strong-arm Putin on this. I mean, look, if any country in the world could, it would probably be the U.S. But if you want a loose cannon like Donald Trump negotiating with an even looser cannon of a nuclear superpower, that's a voting decision. It's a voting decision that might kill us all, honestly. So I don't like the way that administration is oriented into that. And the difference isn't quite as clear with Israel, right? Because it's a difference between wanting to look like you're saying the right thing while doing exactly what Israel's funding dictates that you do. Because Israel has a large amount of political funding into both parties. But compared to a lot of the other actors out there who are trying to influence American politicians, Israel throws its money around a lot more. So there's a lot of Democratic politicians that have these same issues of, let's say, corruption or motivated reasoning when it comes to Israel. So there is nuance here. And the nuance roughly seems to be the way that they talk about it in public, unfortunately. I'm not hugely sure that there would be massive policy differences, except that Donald Trump is just generally a loose cannon, so we shouldn't expect it to be well thought out or anything. Or, the best plan that his billionaire donors could come up with, essentially, is what we should expect out from him. And if you let companies control the interest in a war, I think we know how this goes. Like 2001, we had two wealthy oil magnates in office as president and vice president, and it launched us into a 20-year plus debacle in which we were fighting for oil in the Middle East to profit both of their companies and their families. Halliburton made a lot of money off of Iraq and just the Middle East conflict in general, and so did a lot of interests that supported the Bush family as well. So, like, we've seen the playbook for this. We know how this is going to go, because Donald Trump is effectively, he, just as much as any of them, just as much as Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, Matt Christensen, any of those tenant media people, fucking Lauren Chin, any of them, he's just as bad. He has no ideas but the ideas that billionaires pay to put in his head. He wouldn't have a thought if it weren't for that. If you want the best politicians that billionaires can buy, then it seems like your vote is safe with Trump and Vance. But if you want a movement that is more for the people, that will be concerned with your concerns, that will care about you, that has a track record of doing these things. Because especially in the Walz-Vance debate, we saw Vance trotting out a lot more of these like friendly conservative ideas, right? The things that Walz agreed with. Again, I think this marks at least a messaging shift for the Republican Party. I have yet to see the policy shift. Again, they talk a lot about small businesses already, and they've never done much of anything about that. So, like, why should I expect that they'll do what they say? That's what Project 2029 is about, not what Project 2025 is about. And it just reminds me of that, like, polite racist guy, like, big get out vibes from J.D. Vance during this debate. There's actually a couple people I know personally that are this guy. Just like the polite white guy with the really offensive core beliefs. That he's very polite, and so you never really notice that he's a horrible and offensive person. Yeah, that guy. Yeah, I know some of those. And that's exactly what J.D. Vance seems like here. So if you want the party that has a track record of working with those ideas, of giving them to the American public, people who know how to implement this policy, instead of people who just have rather lately learned that it is politically advantageous to talk about it, then you really got to give it up for Harris Walz here. Now, like I said, I've noted some issues, even on their core strengths, the greatest advantages they have against Donald Trump. I think there is still a lot of room in those policies to get better. And unlike a lot of the things that Vance said about, well, why didn't Harris do this while she's in office?
A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies.
A lot of her proposals, especially the things that were in her opening campaign speech, where she revealed a lot of her policy concepts and ideas, especially as it pertains to like the economy and to food and to supply chains. A lot of that stuff is already happening under the Biden-Harris administration. They're going ahead and laying the groundwork for these bigger, more expansive policies. It's not like they can just pump all of this out at once. You know, it takes time. And also, as the moderate, this was actually, for what I can say about Walz's performance, he kind of let me down. He did a good job, right? He did mostly the things I expected him to. It's just the charisma wasn't quite there. he looked a lot more flustered. But this debate was moderated really well. I love the moderators. They did a great job of like grounding this and fact checking it. This should be kind of the format moving forward. This is a really good debate format. And like I've noticed in a lot of debates, like the presidential debate is just talking points. It's just words. It's empty air. It's a lot of platitudes. If you really want to get policy details, that's what they make the vice presidents talk about. Like the president never learns their own policy, as far as you can tell from like watching their debates or speeches. But if you really want the details, if you want, you know, someone who's read the stuff and knows the stuff, you go to the VP debate. And I think this really helped us with a lot of information. Really, again, if you're listening to the words, or if you're reading this as a transcript, for instance, like you would get a very different impression. I think transcript Walz wins this for sure. Muted video Walz loses. You know, so like we're talking about impressions here when you talk about who wins a debate, because you're talking about a big audience. You're not just talking about the most sophisticated person in the audience who is up to date on the issues and knows the policies and stuff. We're talking about the uninformed voters who are going to see this. And vibes is a big thing. So, you know, the vibes being off in that debate is a little bit hard for the Harris-Walz campaign. But then again, if you saw the Harris-Trump debate, then you're probably thinking that Harris has this in the bag. And, you know, a lot of polling has indicated that a lot of people think she's got it in the bag since the debate. I'd be interested to know how the polling changes after this one. I don't think it's going to shift that much. And I don't think it's going to shift towards Trump and Vance, even though you could say that in some respects they won this debate. But they didn't win it with good ideas, right? And they didn't win it by distinguishing themselves or making themselves sound good, except for like the two economic metrics.
Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country.
Let me just tell you something right here. I'll link a video in the description that goes through this point by point. But from basically every economic indicator that you can get from both presidential campaigns, Donald Trump ruined our economy in so many ways. And there's a lot of other like nuance to talking about presidential budgets and all of that stuff in the economy under presidents. And honestly, presidents only have kind of a minute influence on the economy. You've really got to look at the world factors. You know, the economy is the culmination of everyone acting in simultaneous action across the world. It's not something that one president influences necessarily, even though, you know, he can have a big impact, even though things like the Inflation Reduction Act have already had a big impact. But really, I thought it was telling, particularly, that Vance always had to go back to take-home pay went up, right? He had to go back to things like that. And of course, take-home pay went up. You know, there were so many people out of work because of how horribly things were mismanaged during COVID that employers actually had to pay them a lot more money to get them back into the office. This phenomenon did not happen because Donald Trump was doing good policy. This phenomenon happened during that time period. You know what I mean? So like the only economic indicator that he can say was a positive for Donald Trump is an economic indicator that basically has nothing to do with Donald Trump. The economic indicators that the president has more direct control over and the issues and things that he could actually influence, he did really poorly on consistently. And it's just, you know, I'm sure this is annoying to a lot of people, but I find it frankly a little bit annoying that so much of the American public like thinks highly of him on the economy when he did such an absolutely terrible job. I know everybody looks at him like, oh, billionaire businessman. He's obviously going to be good for the economy. He was obviously good for the economy. Look at the numbers, please. Before you make these assessments or stoke these feelings in your heart, please look at the numbers first. Like, let's just see if your ideas check out before broadcasting them. But anyways, I'll leave that source in the description. I thought it was a good watch. It was also pretty short and fairly neutral. It was good. It was good stuff. It was good stuff. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for tuning in to my post-debate wrap-up. Again, I kind of wish that Walz had done better. I wish that Walz had more adopted the strategy that Harris adopted in maybe trolling Vance a little bit. It felt like Vance was the bigger troll here, and that shouldn't win a debate. But trolls do well in debates because trolling works. I This is part of why debates are a pretty flawed way of assessing ideas. But it is an idea. It is a way. It's one of the best ones that we got, really. At least in terms of things that people pay attention to and watch. So thank you for paying attention to and watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Those are both very helpful for the channel and very helpful for my content, especially if you want to see more of that in your news stream. Also, definitely check out my older videos. I have a lot of videos recently that have done really well. And I have a lot of videos that were released like right in between them where I'm talking about like intelligence operations that just got utterly suppressed by YouTube. I'm talking about like thousands of views on one video, a dozen views on another one. It's utterly ridiculous that I find that those are some of the most fascinating videos that I've made, and also the best well-researched and most in-depth. I don't know. Maybe that's not necessarily appealing to the YouTube audience, but I really feel like I'm being suppressed by the algorithm on those videos very specifically. YouTube is watching the shit out of my channel. So if you want to be apprised of every new piece of content that I put up, please ring that bell. It is super important for my channel. I talk about these controversial topics. YouTube likes to suppress them. So if you want to see more takes like this, or maybe even more specifically, this video is probably going to do well. It's a popular topic. If you want to see more videos like my coverage of Iran and Russia and their intelligence operations in the 2024 US election and other things that they were doing, it's not just all election stuff. They're doing a lot of things. If you want to see more content like that, please ring that bell. Also, remember, click that link in the description to see there's a podcast version of this show. There's also books that I've written, both in kind of like the fantasy science fiction world, but also in kind of a near future, near past cyberpunk. One book that I wrote that took place in the early pandemic is called It Even Happens While We Sleep. And it looks at, you know, our high-tech society, issues of data privacy, and views it all through the lens of an interesting new technology that allows you to record your dreams and watch them back while you're awake. Very interesting. But it all goes very wrong and leads into a full trilogy of books. I'm writing the last one right this moment. The second one is already out. And the first, It Even Happens While We Sleep, is available in hardback right now for only $15. And because of the issues with Amazon that I mentioned earlier in this video, I get like $1 out of that. It sucks. So buy one for yourself, buy one for your friends, buy one for a Christmas present, birthday presents, all that stuff. Support my content, and hopefully we will have a president that will support us. What else can I say about this election, man? It's honestly, it feels maybe like less of a shit show than most elections. Every election with Donald Trump in it feels like a shit show, especially when you have a fucking cesspool like JD Vance stepping up too. At least Mike Pence was boring and milquetoast. This guy is actually genuinely offensive and has the youthful energy to be offensive for a long time in American politics from here. So, again, thank you so much for tuning into this video. Thank you so much for watching. And with all that being said, I will see you in the next one.